Hello valued viewers, I hope you're all doing very well. Recently I got a lovely new set of rudder pedals that I use in DCS, and it got me thinking about how important rudder pedals are in DCS, and I guess other sims as well. I don't do other sims, just DCS, and I thought I would share my experience in case it helps. So my story is, I started playing DCS in about 2016, so about 8 years ago. I actually spent the first 2.5 years without rudder pedals. Instead, I found other solutions. So in planes, to control the rudder bar, and helicopters to control the anti-torque pedals, I first tried using the keyboard and it didn't work out very well. Then I tried using an axis kind of switch on my throttle lever. I think it was a Cytec X56 I had at the time, and that sort of worked. And then I finally settled on a twist grip solution. Again, I think it was the X56, where you could actually twist the stick to be a rudder axis, and that just about got me through. The reason I didn't have rudder pedals is because I had problems with my legs at the time. I had a lot of numbness and a lot of pain, and it just wasn't worth the stress. And then in a weird twist of fate, after 18 months or so of becoming increasingly unwell, I remember I was at a Grim Reapers meetup at Riot Airshow, and I finally collapsed in front of one of the aircraft there. Which, strangely enough, that aircraft has been destroyed in the Ukraine war. Isn't that weird? I was taken to hospital and diagnosed with a long-growing cancer, which was nice. I had that treated, and that's great because I survived it. But one of the nice benefits of that treatment is it fixed, or more or less fixed, my legs, so I could then use my legs for stuff. So a couple of months after realising that, I went and got my first set of rudder pedals, a very cheap bottom of the range set. It's been 6 years or so since then, and I've moved through 4 sets of rudder pedals, starting at the bottom, and I'm now on a, I guess, absolute top of the range, fully metal set with all the bells and whistles. And I have to say, at this point, there's no way I could go back to non-rudder pedals. I'm very spoilt, I guess. So I'm probably going to call this video something like why rudder pedals are so important, and I have 3 key points. So the first key point is resolution of movement. So all 3 solutions that I had before I got rudder pedals meant I didn't have a great deal of resolution of movement. Let's say the twist of the stick. I can't do it here, but imagine I was actually twisting the stick clockwise and anti-clockwise. I don't have a huge degree of resolution of movement, or precision maybe is a better word. Look at this aircraft. I'm in a 1940s Thunderbolt here. Look at the size of the actual rudder bar. Look how much movement there is. There's like 10 inches or 12 inches of actual movement in there. And that's because the rudder is very important in a plane, and especially in a helicopter. You need lots of resolution of movement, like you need lots of resolution of stick in both types of aircraft. So the first point is that a good set of rudder pedals will allow me that movement. So my rudder pedals I'm using at the moment give actually about that amount of movement, about 10 to 12 inches of movement. Yes, it's weird doing it with your feet rather than your hand, but it's just something you get used to. That resolution of movement isn't that important on the ground, but when in the air, especially with an analog aircraft like this, where there's no flight control system, you really need that resolution of movement to make sure the aircraft is trimmed in terms of yaw, and especially in helicopters, where the yaw is so important. The second point, or the second reason, is confliction, or interaction, maybe a better word. So you remember I was talking about the solution of twisting the stick to act as your rudder axis. Well, that worked okay on the ground, but in the air it caused problems, and the reason is it's impossible to twist a stick and not also move the stick a bit in terms of forwards and backwards and left and right. So you would be lining up on a hostile in this aircraft here, for instance. I would have my stick in the set position, then I would twist it because I would need a little bit of rudder to slew left, and what would happen is I would accidentally move the stick forward and right and whatever and spoil my shot. That interaction is pretty much impossible to cancel. Obviously, if your yacht is controlled by your feet, then there is no interaction at all between... look at that. I say there's no interaction. I can actually see it's moving my stick a little bit, but that's, you know, we're talking a millimetre at best. And that moves us to point 3, which is the biggest one. And I could make an hour video on point 3. And that is toe brakes. Toe brakes, toe brakes, toe brakes are the biggest thing that I found. It's only relevant to ground operations. Toe brakes have no use in the air. And a toe brake, in case you don't know, is as well as the rudder bar moving, look, pip, all aircraft, or most aircraft, sorry, not all aircraft, have that feature there, or planes I should say. All that does is it allows me to put pressure on the right wheel brake only, or the left wheel brake only. Not only is it on or off, but I can control the amount of pressure on that left or right brake. Well, why is that useful? Well, for me, I fly all aircraft in DCS, so that's about 50 different type of aircraft plus another 100 different types of unofficial mods. There is no way in hell I can remember the operating procedures of how to taxi, take off and land all of those aircraft with the official procedures. So I need to find a uniform, easy to control and remember way of controlling all of those aircraft on the ground, especially in terms of takeoff and landing. Now remember, the rudder on the aircraft, which controls its left and right yaw, only works once you've reached a certain airspeed. That airspeed will depend on the aircraft type, somewhere between 50 and 100 knots. So up to that speed, you need another way of controlling the yaw of the aircraft. And for me, with all aircraft, excluding helicopters, well actually, to be honest, even including the Apache, I use toe brakes. If I'm slewing off to the left or right slightly, I'll apply a little bit of toe brake, depending how much I need to and in which direction. That will keep me straight and true until the effect of the rudder can start taking over. It's important to say that that is not really realistic and that is not standard operating procedure. You would be kicked out of the Air Force if you're in an F-16 and you're smacking the toe brake all the time in anything other than an emergency, I imagine. But real pilots don't have to fly 50 or 150 types of aircraft, so it's become a really nice uniform way for me to control aircraft on takeoff and landing, which some aircraft is really difficult. Look at this jug, it's really difficult to take off. An F-16 even with modern systems is difficult to take off in a 20-knot crosswind. You need to find a way of keeping it level. And so it's become an absolute must for me. And right, that's pretty much all I want to say. But let's give a quick example. So you can see on the bottom left there, toe brake pressure, pip, pip. And you've got really no way of doing that unless you have toe brakes on a rudder pedal. And you've got the rudder bar, you can see at the bottom there. Right, so the way I would taxi this aircraft, for instance, probably not the way you're supposed to do it, but for the reasons that I said before. It keeps it easy. Look, I apply a bit of toe brake pressure, and that's all I'm using. I'm not using the rudder bar at all. In fact, I probably won't use the rudder bar until I'm about 70 miles an hour. All right, and let's give a takeoff and see what happens. So power on, looking out the side of the cockpit. Can you see? I'm trying to look down as well. See my rudder pedal that I'm pushing. Sorry, my toe brake that I'm pushing. Bit of forward stick. Oh, careful. Power on. Right, rudder's coming into play. Rudder, 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 right. And airborne, gear up. That is pretty much how I take off most of my warbirds, and it'll also apply to modern aircraft. Let's go and jump in an F-16. This is a digital fly-by-wire system, so the rudder bar is not linked to the actual rudder, so there's less movement here, but the amount of resolution that you need is still just as important. So I'm going to taxi. This aircraft has nose wheel steering, so pip, nose wheel steering. I can use the rudder bar to turn me roughly onto vector. I've got a crosswind in as well here, so I'm going to need some toe brakes. Turn the nose wheel steering off. Right, so now I'm going to go full power, and I'm going to control the aircraft just with my toe brakes. Again, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to do this in real aircraft. You would cause all sorts of problems, but that's it. That's pretty much how I would take an F-16 off, to be honest. I didn't use the rudder bar at all. I just use my toe brakes, and I use the same on landing. I guess one more benefit is real aircraft pilots don't have to worry about internet lag. If you play on multiplayer on big servers like I do every day, then I do. Internet gets easily overwhelmed, and sometimes you get big lag spikes where everything stops and then starts again. I'm sure you've all seen it before. And if you're taking off and landing when that happens, it often ends up in a big fireball. Well, what I found is that when dealing with internet lag, using the rudder as an aerodynamic way of steering when taking off and landing, often you end up losing control during the lag spike and dying. If you're using wheel brakes, for reasons I don't really understand, in the same scenario, you often survive. I'm not going to really worry about it too much, but that's just what I found. I think that's all I want to say for the moment, viewers. So 3 main points of rudder pedals over non-rudder pedals. In my experience, resolution of movement, no interaction with a stick or almost no interaction, and toe brakes, which are just so friggin' important and life-saving for me. Let's see what the other Reapers think.
Cheers, Cap. My thoughts on rudder pedals for flight sims. Well, I've been playing flight sims for over 3 decades now. God, I feel old. Like you, when I first started out, I was using very basic flight controls, and eventually progressed to a joystick with a twist grip, which I could use for the yaw axis for rudder pedals. Having never tried proper rudder pedals before, I found that using the twist grip was fine, or so I thought. I got my first set of pedals probably about 15ish years ago. I remember I bought a second-hand set of entry-level plastic pedals, nothing special, but as soon as I started using them in flight sims, they were an absolute game changer. Being able to control the aircraft pedals with your feet, using actual pedals and not having to try and make precision movements with the flight stick whilst twisting it at the same time, that was that as far as I was concerned. Couldn't ever go back to not using proper rudder pedals in flight sims. I fly a lot of warbirds and helicopters, so my rudder pedals get a good workout whenever I jump into DCS. But those aren't the only aircraft that require a fair bit of fancy footwork. My beloved Tomcat, for instance, is a good old-fashioned plane, with none of that fly-by-wire trickery of the likes of the Hornet or Viper, so it needs a lot of rudder input whilst flying and fighting to keep your turns coordinated and your nose pointed in the right direction. Precise ground handling and taxiing is especially important on the confined spaces of the carrier decks, try to manoeuvre between parked aircraft to get to the catapult. Once you get to where you're going, you might want to stop, and that's where toe brakes come in handy. I would always recommend, if you're considering buying a set of rudder pedals, get some with toe brakes. Anyway, I've bored you all enough already with my dulcet tones. What do you think, Kelso?
Cool stuff, guys. You've discussed piston and jet reasons for rudder pedals, so I'll add a bit on helicopter anti-torque pedals and what they do.
Welcome to Helicopter Training Videos. In this video we're going to look at anti-torque systems. Before we get into the anti-torque systems, we need to talk about torque. Torque is all about Newton's third law: for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. In this case, when we're looking at this helicopter viewed from above, we can see that the main rotor blades are being swung round counter or anti-clockwise, and the reaction is the torque reaction. The equal and opposite is the torque reaction, which is felt through the body of the aircraft and wants to swing the helicopter in the opposite direction. So as the blades go counterclockwise, the body would spin clockwise. We have a tail rotor to stop that. That's an anti-torque system in a traditional helicopter. In helicopters that have multiple main rotor blades, Chinooks and things like that, they don't need a separate tail rotor or an anti-torque system, because the 2 main rotors, or 4 main rotors if there's that many, actually are turning against each other and cancelling the torque.
Guys, I've never flown a sim without rudders, so I really can't compare, but based on your experiences, it makes a world of difference. Folks, if you love helicopters for the sheer stick and rudder challenge of doing it right, you need rudder pedals. And I've been using rudder pedals in one form or another since the early 70s, so you're not old, Skil. I am. At slower speeds, pedals become effective enough to fly sideways or provide the ability to turn around a point. At faster speeds, the helicopter will weather vane towards the direction of travel, making the rudder pedals less effective. And flying the Apache in DCS is the single best reason to buy rudder pedals with toe brakes. Cap, Skil, and I were sent Windwing Skywalker rudder pedals to review, and we used them to make these clips. We'll publish a full review in a few days. Thank you for watching.